Mm, that's super helpful. So, the first thing we're going to do is kind of lay the context. So, I'm curious to start off. We have this book of Deuteronomy that's in our Bibles. Where does this book come from?
Yes, well, there are lots of views about this, and for those who've studied Old Testament, they will know that there are a whole a spectrum of views about the origins of Old Testament documents, and indeed reconstructions to varying degrees or other of Old Testament history. I'm conservative on this matter, so fundamentally Deuteronomy derives from Moses, who preached the book. We're told that well, at the beginning, it's emphasized in the opening paragraph of Deuteronomy. And it's also clear in Deuteronomy 31, after he finishes preaching at the end of chapter 30, that he writes it down. I see no reason to doubt that. There are probably little editorial comments, minor, I suspect. There's just a few verses here and there where, well, firstly, Moses is in the third person. So Moses said this, or Moses went on to say, the opening paragraphs in the third person. So I suspect Moses wrote the actual sermon down, or his his amanuensis or his secretary or whoever it was, and then somebody, maybe a touch later, added the opening paragraph and a couple of other things to sort of give it a bit more context. And there's a couple of little verses that look as though they come from a bit later that maybe somebody has tweaked at a later point. They're relatively inconsequential, I think. But the more skeptical view of the origin of Deuteronomy, if I can call it skeptical, that is related to Moses' authorship, would be that the book was written around about 622 BC by somebody or some people and planted it in the temple so that Josiah would find it in his reforms and then act upon it. And we know that the Book of the Covenant was found in the time of Josiah. I suspect it was part of, if not all of, Deuteronomy. Certainly the responses that Josiah shows at that time reflect emphases within Deuteronomy, including pulling down the idols in other places of worship and so on. So it does seem that the book was found there. Was it written as what Wellhausen called a pious fraud? That is a good book, but it's a fraud because it's not by Moses, but somebody's written it for good purposes and planted it. It seems a bit far-fetched to me, to be honest. The motivations for reform for Josiah had already begun before the book was found, probably stimulated by Jeremiah a few years earlier and maybe other things. The idea of the book being lost is not problematic to me. Manasseh was the king for 50 odd years, a bad king, got rid of all the scriptures and so on. People didn't have copies of the Bible in those days. So, to lose, the main copy in a temple, could be quite drastic in its consequences. And I think there's too many other things that make the book look as though it's much earlier. There are people who think, they've got convoluted arguments about Mount Ebal, Mount Gerizim, the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom. The simplest thing is that it predates the division of the kingdom, which divided after Solomon's death, in my opinion.